Good afternoon, Inside Out. How are we doing? Hey, my name is Hayden. I work here with Inside Out. I'm so happy to be here with you guys. Something that I have noticed since I got here to Inside Out that I really need to share with you guys is I don't think that there's anything that I can think of that rivals worship with Inside Out. Like, I love worshiping with Inside Out. And don't get me wrong, our band is fantastic. I love to hear them. They're great. Singing with them is a ton of fun. But what I'm talking about is you guys. I love to worship with all of you. Because when I'm worshiping with all of you, I never walk away empty. I always walk away from worship with you guys thinking that my heart is just so incredibly full. It is so incredibly full. Now, I'm obviously not talking about like my physical heart being full of anything. Obviously not pouring anything into my heart literally, but what I am talking about is my heart as we use it as that like metaphor in our speech, right? Like if you ever heard your grandmother say, "Oh, bless your heart," as much as she wants you to have good heart health, that's not what she's talking about. She's talking about your heart as it represents to your personality, your being, who you are. And what I love is that we are starting a brand new series here tonight called It Came From Within. We're going to get to talk about this for the next couple of weeks. And it's going to be all about how what comes from within us is so often related to what's in our heart. For example, I was back in December. I went and saw a movie. Maybe you heard of it. It was the newest of the Spider-Man movies. When it came out back in December, went to go see this movie with a friend of mine. What you need to know about me is that I am 25 years old. That puts me at about 6 when that first Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movie came out. So at the age of 6, superheroes are your life. Superheroes are everything. I literally wanted to be Spider-Man. I grew up with a heart full of love for Spider-Man all throughout my childhood. I mean, I wanted to be him. I was Spider-Man for Halloween growing up. And me and my friend that I went with, we loved Spider-Man. Now, I am going to spoil a couple of things in the movie. So, spoiler alert ahead, if you have not seen this movie and you want to, I highly suggest you shutting your ears. But my friend and I went to go see this movie, and we loved it. And maybe you're like us and you had heard all the rumors of the added cast. You had heard the rumors that maybe the other 2 Spider-Men were going to make an appearance in this movie. Well, we were so excited, and I kid you not, the actual tears of joy that were in my eyes when he's opening the portal, and you can see the figurette coming at, the figure of Spider-Man Tobey Maguire coming at you, and he walks through there, and I looked at my friend, and we both have just tears of joy in our eyes, because we love, this is our childhood hero that we are watching come out onto a screen. Fast forward through the movies. Again, I mentioned spoiler alert. Close your ears if you don't want to hear it. Fast forwarding to that fight scene at the end of the movie. They are at the Statue of Liberty, right? And Tom Holland is fighting Green Goblin. And he's fighting him, and he gets the glider, and he's got the glider above his head, and he's about to stab and kill Green Goblin. Of course, Tobey Maguire knows that this is not what's best for him, so he comes up, and Tobey Maguire stops Tom Holland. And right as Tom Holland is putting the glider down, Green Goblin jumps up, stabs Tobey Maguire in the back. And as he fell, my friend sitting right next to me goes, "No!" in the middle of the theater. And I kid you not, he literally screams no in the middle of the theater. It just came out. The entire theater starts looking at us. I've never been in the back of a theater and seen eyes looking at me, not the screen, but they're all looking at trying to figure out where the sound came from. I'm looking at him like, what just happened? And he says, "I don't know. It just came out." And obviously, we're trying to figure this out, but the reality is that in that moment, it just came out. There was nothing that he could do to package it down. There's nothing that he could do to stop it. It just came out. And that is what we're going to be talking about for the next couple of weeks. We're going to be talking about how what just comes out so often is related to what's in our heart. So like if we think about our hearts like a cup, right? If our heart is like a cup, then what was filling his cup was love for Tobey Maguire, Spider-Man. I mean, Spider-Man, all Spider-Mans, but Tobey Maguire specifically. And when Tobey Maguire, Spider-Man, got stabbed, what spilled out when his cup got rocked was that love. And it spilled out in the form of scream and tears. He was also crying. But the thing is, and what we want to talk about is that that isn't only true with something funny like love for a superhero. What we want to talk about is that if this is true, then what we fill our heart with matters. Because if we're filling our heart with negative things, anger, resentment, lust, selfishness, hurt, if those are the things that we're going to fill our heart with, then eventually we're going to get to a point where our heart's full. But when our heart gets filled up, that's not when the world stops moving. No. It's at this point that whatever is in our heart is going to come out. Because the world's going to hit us. Our parents aren't going to see things our way. We're going to see a success of one of our friends, and instead of being happy for them, what's going to spill out is resentment. What ends up happening is we're just not doing well that day. Our heart is full of anger. We get into a traffic jam. Somebody looks at us the wrong way, and we're just going to blow up. See, the reality of this whole situation, the reality of this is that the things in our life that we are filling our heart with are what are going to come out of us. That is going to be what comes out of us. And these are what we want to avoid. And then what we end up doing is we're looking at this and we're seeing all of the spillage. We're seeing the angry remark. We're seeing the fighting with our parents. We're seeing the jealousy of our friends. And we're saying, I got to figure out how to fix that. Because that's the problem here, right? The problem is that the people around us are getting hurt, that we are hurting, we're saying negative things. What happens is our behavior gets negative, so what do we try to do? We want to try to manage our behavior. We want to go ahead and put that up. We want to try to manage our behavior when what we really need to be doing is monitoring our hearts. We're so focused on what spills over when we get knocked that we've got to try to fix that. We've got to try to fix that. So what are we going to do to fix our behavior? Well, there are three things that I know that I have done all throughout my life. It's pretty common. The first one being that we're just going to try harder. I'm just going to try harder to do better. I'm going to try harder to not react that way. I'm going to try harder to feel happy for them. And if that doesn't work, then we're just going to try to hide our reactions. We're going to try to hide our reactions away, not let anybody see them. Nobody needs to know that. As long as we're pretending that we're good, nobody has to know what we're thinking. Nobody has to know what we're thinking. Or maybe it's that we're just going to ignore our feelings. If we can't hide it, then we'll just ignore them. We'll shove our feelings down to the side. We'll put them in a box and just forget about them. Because if we can just do these three things, then the spillage will be minimized, right? Yeah, but the problem with that, the problem with everything that I just listed, that's just wearing a mask. That's putting a Band-Aid over the bigger problem, because the reality is that managing our behavior doesn't change our hearts. Managing our behavior, fixing the spillover, is not going to change the content of our hearts. And guys, this is not a new thing. This is not a problem that only applies to these generations. It's not a problem that is anything new. This problem goes all the way back to the beginning. We can find it all throughout the Bible. In fact, we are going to look at a story in the life of David tonight. Now, maybe you know David. David was the second king of Israel. Maybe you know him from fighting Goliath. He defeated the giant. David is an author of the Bible. He wrote a lot of the Psalms. He wrote one that we're going to look at later tonight. David is also very famously, maybe you've heard of the guy who is, it's the guy after God's own heart. The man after God's own heart. That's David. Now, I don't know about you guys, but when I'm thinking of a man after God's own heart, I'd imagine that this isn't what his cup looks like. No. His cup isn't filled up of the negative things. It's the good things. It's the grace. the joy, the self-control, right? Yeah, but as I said, this isn't a new problem, and it affects everybody. And it affects David just the same. We're going to pick up in 2 Samuel 11. And as we get into this story, it's going to say, in the springtime, at the time when kings go off to war, David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. Pause. First sentence. In the springtime, at the time when kings go to war. Stop. What does that tell us? It tells us that traditionally, and this is verified historically, traditionally, typically, the king of a nation goes to war with his men. That's not what happened here. What happens is David just prepped his general Joab, the leader of his army. He sent Joab and his army out to fight while he just stayed home. Because what was filling up his heart in that moment was not the bravery, it was not the strength, it was not the love for his men. No, it was the fear and the selfishness of, I don't want to do that. I don't want to go to war. So instead, David just stayed home. Now, I'd imagine that decision kind of takes a toll on him, right? I mean, I know that it would me if I sent thousands of men to fight and potentially die on my behalf while I just stayed at home in my palace enjoying the finer things of life. That would strike a chord with me. And as it did David, and I don't know about you guys, but when I get to thinking, I start pacing, right? I've got something on my mind and it's going through my head and I can't get it out, so I'm just gonna pace. And as we continue on with the story, David did the same thing. He gets up in the evening, he gets up out of bed and he's pacing around and he needs to get away. He needs to get some fresh air to clear his head. He steps out on his balcony and he's in a palace, right? So his balcony's high up and he can see over the whole city and he's just taking in the city, taking in his kingdom. And as he does, he looks over and he takes notice of a woman. And the Bible describes this woman as very, very beautiful. And this beautiful woman is bathing out on her roof. Why is she bathing on the roof, you might ask? I certainly did. Looked it up. Turns out they didn't have typical plumbing back in biblical times. So what they did was they had baths and tubs on their roof because that was typically the place of privacy. Like if you're walking on the ground and you look up, you can't see onto somebody's roof. The difference was that David was up high, so he could see her. And like any good king, he realized, hey, I don't know her. And a good leader knows the people that he's leading, right? If I don't know the people that I'm leading, then how can I know what they need? How can I know what they want? How can I honor them well? So David, like any good king, he gathers his men and he says, hey, we need to figure out who this is. So he sends his men off and they come back and they tell him, hey, she is Bashiba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite. Now David's thinking, wow, she's a beautiful woman, but she's married. But I do happen to know that her husband's off at war right now. Uriah's in my army, so he's off at war. So he's trying to think through, what should I do? Being a man after God's own heart, I think it only makes sense that the story continues on, and it says, David, confessed to his men and to God the sin of lust in his heart, put on his pajamas, and then watched Spider-Man. Because Spider-Man is the best superhero, as we all know. No, that's not what happened. I mean, that's what you think would have happened. You would think that David thought to himself that he was embarrassed or that he needed to repent. But no, David let the lust, David let the selfishness and the hurt and the fear that was already there keep filling up his heart, poured some jealousy on top. And here's what happened is David sent messengers to get her. She came to him and he slept with her. Now, stopping there is bad enough, but it continues on and it says, then she went back to her home. The woman conceived a child and sent word to David saying, I'm pregnant. Now David's in a tough spot. Because now you see, David has let fear and selfishness prevent him from going to war. He stayed back and sent his people to fight his own battle. Now he's let lust and jealousy convince him that it's a good idea to bring Bashiba up to his house. He finds himself in a position where the contents of his heart have spilt over and led him to not go to war, have an affair with a married woman, and get her pregnant. And just like we talked about, when things start spilling out of our heart, what did David do? He said, I've got to manage the behavior. I've got to fix the spillage. So that's what he does. David starts thinking through and says, hey, how can I fix this? What can we do to hide what I have done? Well, he says, hey, if I can get Uriah to sleep with his wife, then nobody will know. They don't have pregnancy tests back then. Those are pretty modern. So what he does is David sends for Uriah to come back from the war. He sends for Uriah to come back, and he tells them, hey, I need for Uriah to come back and update me on how the war is going. David thinks, I can just get him to come back one night with his wife. That's all we need. And then he'll go back, and it'll be like nothing ever happened. So that's what happens. Uriah comes back. The issue is that Uriah doesn't sleep with his wife. When he updates David, and David suggests, hey, just go take a night for the fact that you came back and updated me. Take a night at home with your wife. But Uriah said, no, I can't do that. He said, I can't do that because I don't feel that it would be right for me to spend a night at home in my own bed with all of my men on the battlefield. So what I would do is I will sleep with your staff, and then I will return to battle in the morning. That's a problem for David. So David thinks quick on his feet, and he says, well, maybe if I get Uriah drunk, maybe then I can get him to sleep with his wife. So he says, well, at least join me for dinner. At least join me for dinner. So Uriah does just that, and David brings out the strongest wine that he can find. He gets Uriah drunk, and then he's like, hey, I know you said you didn't want to, but why don't you just go take a night with your wife? Take a night at your house and then go back to war tomorrow. But Uriah wasn't having it. See, the truth is that Uriah's heart was filled up with pure intention. Uriah's heart was filled up with pure intention. So what that meant is that even when he was drunk, what spilled over wasn't the negativity. What spilled over wasn't the greed or the lust that he has for his wife. No, that's not what his heart was filled with. What spilled over was the conviction. The conviction that he couldn't take a night at home while his men were at war. So David thought, well, I've only got one option left. So he sends Uriah back to the war with a sealed letter. This is what the letter said. In it, the letter wrote, put Uriah out on the front where the fighting is fiercest. Then withdraw from him so that he will be struck down and die. David essentially murdered Uriah. This worked, by the way. They did just that. Uriah went back. They put him on the front lines. They pulled back and he died. This is the problem with managing our behavior. This is the problem with managing our behavior because when all we're focused on is the spillage, it doesn't work. When we try to manage our behavior, we end up with lies on top of lies, bad decision on top of bad decision, and we end up in a place worse than that. And David ended up realizing that. After all of this happened, God sent a prophet named Nathan to talk with David, to confront him about what he had done. And David found himself in that position that all of us have found ourselves in, wondering, where did that come from? What just happened? I don't know, why did I do that? But at that point, it was too late. At that point, he had spent so much time managing his decisions that he had hurt people. Instead of trying to focus on the content of his heart, he continued to manage decisions and he continued to hurt people. But he realized that wasn't the correct way. And we know this because, as I said, David wrote the Psalms. And there's this psalm called Psalm 51. It's an entire psalm as a confessional to this whole situation. But there's one line in particular where David shows us what he should have done from the beginning. Psalm 51:10 says, create in me a pure heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me. Create in me a pure heart. Don't fix what's spilled out, but change what fills it up. Now, we can see that David, the tone is shifted. David's no longer saying, hey, God, will you help me to try harder to do better next time? Will you help me to hide my reactions better? Will you help me to ignore my feelings, God? No, he didn't do any of that. He said, God, will you help create a pure heart in me? Because David realized in that moment that your actions are a reflection of your heart. He realized that your actions are a reflection of your heart, and no matter what you do, no matter how much you try to manage your behavior, It's not gonna work. It's not gonna work because people will always feel what fills your heart. That's another way to say it, is I like to say that people are going to feel what fills your heart. Have you guys ever taken a moment to contemplate, hey, what is my heart actually full of right now? What is my heart actually full of? Are you in a place where your heart's full of the negative things that are spilling over or full of the joyous things? Well, I would challenge you guys to do that tonight. I've got 4 questions that can kind of help us process through that. I'd love for you to ask yourself just while you're sitting here, hey, do you ever catch yourself doing things that you just shouldn't be doing? Like you know you shouldn't, but somehow again and again you find yourself there. You guys ever say something that you wish that you could take back? Say something that you know is hurtful that goes out into the world and you're like, I messed up. Do you guys ever see a great post or see like this really cool success of one of your friends, and instead of just being happy for them, you just get jealous? You become resentful. You, for whatever reason, you believe that you deserve that instead of them. You guys ever find yourself holding on to hurt? Holding on to the things that happened to you way longer than you should? If you said yes to any of these things, you're probably in a place right now where you need to monitor what's in your heart. For me, it was this last one. For me, it was a lot of hurt that I experienced my senior year of high school, going in to that summer before college. I experienced a lot of hurt. I experienced that hurt, and I let it fill my heart, and I took it with me. And my freshman year of college looked like a lot of spillage from that hurt. People were certainly feeling what was spilling out of my heart. I had a lot of, man, why did I do that moments? Why did I drink that? Why did I go to that party? Why did I break that boundary with her? Why did I do this, and where did it come from? And my temptation, just like David, was not to monitor my heart. No, it was to manage my behavior. So that's what I did, and everything just ended up being worse. So my challenge to you tonight is to not focus on that. To not focus on managing the spillage, but to realize that the only way to actually correct course, the only way to actually correct behavior is to ask God, hey, change my heart. So if you're in a place right now where you've answered yes to any of these questions, if you're in a place where maybe you're thinking, I just need to manage my heart, my challenge to you guys tonight is to be real with yourselves. To take notice of your reactions and not try to manage them, but instead let them out. Now, I'm not saying just do mean things or let the spillage go. What I'm saying is take notice of your reactions and let them out in a healthy way. Maybe for you, that's journaling your thoughts, your feelings, your prayers. Maybe for you, that's a small group where you've got great guys, girls, leaders that you can talk to, that you can let this out, that you can process with. And the one thing I know is true for all of us is that we need to let that out to God, that we just need to pray. We have a God who wants to help us get rid of the negative things in our heart and replace it with the good things. All we have to do is ask and spend time with him. So that's my challenge to you tonight, is we are about to go to small group. My challenge is to have real conversations. My challenge is to take notice of what you're saying yes to think to yourself, hey, is there any action in my life that is spilling over that I'm just not proud of? And if so, how can I ask God to help me adjust the contents of my heart? Let's pray. Hey God, thank you so much. Thank you so much for being the God who wants to help us change the content of our hearts. Thank you for being a God who has provided us with community, with friends to talk to. And my ask for you, God, is that would you please tonight just open our hearts to authentic, honest evaluation, that you would show us the spillage in our hearts and show us the nasty, the negative content that we are currently allowing to fill our hearts. And would you begin the process of replacing that with the joyous content that we can only get from you. It's in your name we pray. Amen.